What would you do if you paid for first class, dressed professionally, had every right to be there, and still, they asked you to leave? What if the reason wasn't about your ticket, but the color of your skin? This isn't just another story of quiet humiliation at 30,000 feet. This is a story about a man who said nothing at first, but later he changed everything. Who was this silent man in seat 2? Why did the crew scramble after checking his ID? And how did a single moment of injustice trigger a nationwide reckoning inside the airline industry? He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply watched, remembered, and built something that shook an entire system to its core. But the question remains, how many times has this happened before? And what happens when the quietest person in the room turns out to be the most powerful? This is not fiction. This is the beginning of something much bigger. If you believe in dignity, justice, and stories that matter, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The soft chime at Gate 17 barely stirred the morning crowd. It was 6:12 a.m., and the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal still carried that early hush, the kind before coffee kicks in and announcements start to blur together. Passengers moved slowly, dragging carry-ons and wearing the quiet fatigue of business travel. Donovan West stood just to the side of the line, not checking his phone, not pacing, just waiting. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, scanned the window overlooking the tarmac. The sky was gray and heavy with Texas mist. A small silver plane, Flight 457 to Seattle, sat bathed in runway lights, rain beads streaking across its metallic skin. He wore a slate gray overcoat, tailored but unassuming, over a dark navy sweater. His travel bag leather, weathered, familiar, hung from one shoulder. He didn't look like anyone special, and that was how he preferred it. When the boarding call for first-class passengers came, Donovan didn't rush. He waited for the initial surge to pass, then stepped forward with a quiet, "Good morning" to the attendant. She barely looked at him before waving him through with a clipped smile. The boarding bridge creaked beneath his steps. He moved with the ease of someone who'd taken this walk 100 times before. Not because he was wealthy, though he was, not because he was powerful, though most rooms paused when he entered, but because flying had become second nature. He had earned that ease not through inheritance, but through every contract, every 16-hour day, every time he had to outwork the room just to be seen. Inside the aircraft, the cabin lighting glowed soft amber. First class was empty, but for one man seated near the aisle, flipping through a print copy of The Economist. Donovan offered a polite nod and turned towards seat 1A by the window. He placed his bag in the overhead, slid into the leather seat, and exhaled as if releasing something heavier than breath. This was his ritual. Quiet boarding, minimal noise, a cup of hot tea, a few minutes of silence before the day started chasing him again. He was about to fasten his seatbelt when a voice interrupted the quiet. "Excuse me, sir." He looked up. A flight attendant stood at the front of the aisle. She had platinum blonde hair pinned into a tight twist and a name badge that read Rachel Kessler. Her tone was practiced, polite, but there was something clipped beneath the surface. Donovan straightened. "Yes." Rachel gave a quick smile. "This section is for first class only." Donovan paused. "I'm aware. This is my seat, 1A. There was no aggression in his tone, no defense, just calm. Rachel's smile didn't falter, but her posture shifted slightly. Arms crossed, chin lifted. "Would you mind showing me your boarding pass?" "Please." "Of course." Donovan reached into his coat pocket and handed it to her. She took it, glanced at it briefly just long enough to see the seat number, then frowned. I'll need to see your ID as well, she added, with a flicker of doubt in her eyes. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I haven't been asked for ID on a plane in years. It's just procedure, Rachel said smoothly. We've had some mix-ups lately. A beat passed. He handed her his ID without protest. Rachel studied it longer than necessary, then tapped at her handheld tablet, lips pressed into a thin line. Behind her, a couple entered the cabin and moved toward their seats. Donovan noticed the woman glance at him, then at Rachel, then quickly away. Rachel said after a moment. It looks like you're listed under economy. That's not correct, Donovan said, his voice still calm. I purchased this seat 3 weeks ago, directly through Silverjet's corporate booking. Rachel didn't answer. She looked again at her tablet, tapped a few more times, then looked back up. It may be a glitch, she said, but I'm going to need you to move back to coach until we can sort this out. We're trying to stay on schedule. He blinked, slowly. I'm sorry. You want me to leave my seat, even though I've shown you both my ID and boarding pass. Her eyes narrowed. Like I said, there have been instances of passengers presenting falsified boarding passes. It's nothing personal. Donovan leaned back slightly. The cabin had grown quieter. He could feel the weight of attention, uncertain, curious, drifting from a few rows behind. He wasn't making a scene, but something about him sitting in that seat seemed to make others uncomfortable. Rachel, now visibly impatient, motioned toward the aisle. Let's not delay the flight, sir. If it's a mistake, we'll fix it after takeoff. Donovan didn't move. His voice remained measured. I'd prefer we fix it now. I've done nothing wrong. She pursed her lips. Sir, please don't make this more difficult. More difficult. He looked at her for a long moment. In his chest, he felt the familiar ache, not anger, not fear, but that slow, bitter sting. The one that came from having to prove again and again that he belonged. The same ache he felt at age 10 when a store clerk followed him through the aisles. At 19 when a professor asked if he was visiting the engineering program. At 34 when a client mistook him for the driver. He had built Westbridge Technologies from a basement office into one of the most critical AI infrastructure firms in the country. He had spoken before Congress. He had advised 3 administrations on cybersecurity. But right now, none of that mattered, because to Rachel Kessler, he was just a black man in seat 1A. He reached slowly into his bag and pulled out his Platinum Elite card. The small black rectangle gleamed beneath the cabin lights. He laid it gently on the tray table. Rachel didn't pick it up. She glanced at it, then smiled tightly. Anyone can order one of those online these days. And just like that, it was no longer about policy. It was about perception, the kind that told certain people they must be out of place, that dignity could be interrupted by suspicion. That documentation wasn't enough when the face behind it didn't fit the script. Donovan said nothing, but in his eyes, something shifted. Not rage, not panic, just steel. For a moment, time hung in the narrow space between them. Donovan West remained seated in 1A, still as stone, his boarding pass on the tray, his Platinum Elite card glinting in quiet defiance. Rachel Kessler stood stiffly above him, arms crossed now, lips pressed so tightly they disappeared into her expression. The tension was no longer subtle. It was rising like cabin pressure behind sealed doors. Passengers continued to board behind them, and more than a few slowed as they approached. Their eyes flicked from Rachel to Donovan and back again. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. Others lingered just a moment too long, searching for context. A few held their phones low, angled suspiciously toward the scene. Rachel shifted her posture, but didn't budge. "I need you to move to the back." "Sir," she said again, her voice more clipped than before, "we are not continuing this conversation while you're in a seat you're not assigned to." Donovan spoke gently. "I showed you my boarding pass. I showed you my ID. I showed you my status. What exactly am I being accused of?" "I didn't say you were being accused of anything," she replied, then added with a huff, "but you're creating a delay for other passengers." He tilted his head, calm but not backing down. "I'm not the one stopping boarding." Rachel's cheeks flushed. Just slightly, but enough. That was when Craig Halverson, the gate supervisor, appeared at the front of the cabin. His white shirt still carried the imprint of his security lanyard, and his tie was uneven, likely from rushing over. "What's the issue here?" he asked, looking toward Rachel but nodding politely at Donovan. Rachel spoke before Donovan could open his mouth. "This gentleman is occupying 1A, but says he booked it under his name. His boarding pass doesn't match our manifest. I've asked him to relocate to economy until we can verify." Craig turned to Donovan. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Donovan handed it over silently. Craig squinted at it, then checked his own tablet. He muttered. "Not showing here in first. Do you mind stepping off the plane just for a moment while we check at the desk? It'll just take a second." "I promise." "I'd rather not," Donovan said, polite but firm, "because we both know once I leave this seat, there's no guarantee I'll return to it." Craig offered a hollow chuckle. "Come on, now. We're just trying to keep things moving, while asking me to give up what I rightfully paid for." Craig scratched his head. "Listen, I'm sure this is all just a mix-up. Maybe your assistant made a mistake with the booking." Donovan gave a small smile. "I booked this ticket myself." Rachel leaned over. "Then maybe there was an error with the credit card used. Sometimes the system downgrades if a payment doesn't go through." A soft scoff came from row 2A. A middle-aged woman with silver hair and sharp eyes leaned slightly forward. She had been watching since the first exchange. "So, you're saying he faked the ticket, faked the ID, and faked the elite card?" she asked aloud. Craig turned to her, caught off guard. "Ma'am, we're handling this." The woman sat back, unimpressed. "Doesn't look like it." Rachel bristled. "Ma'am, this is private. It stopped being private when you raised your voice." The woman shot back. Donovan remained silent, but the air around him felt thick now. His heart wasn't racing, but there was a quiet burn building beneath his ribs. This wasn't unfamiliar. It was simply unwanted. It reminded him of how dignity could be so easily challenged, how calmness was mistaken for concession, how compliance was expected without explanation. He glanced toward the aisle. A girl, maybe 16, stood still, phone in hand. Her finger tapped silently at the screen. She was live streaming. It was subtle, but not enough to go unnoticed. Her shirt read Seattle Robotics Academy, and her eyes were wide with that Gen Z blend of curiosity and justice. He gave her a gentle nod. She didn't smile, just whispered to no one in particular. "This doesn't feel right, sir," Craig said again, lowering his voice slightly. "Let's just go talk at the gate. It'll be quick." Donovan considered it. He thought about the headlines, the endless corporate meetings on diversity that never seemed to prevent moments like this. He thought about the years he'd built Westbridge Technologies from the ground up, about the endless scrutiny he'd passed through bank boards, federal contracts, and investment firms who all once asked him to justify his presence in rooms where he was the only one who looked like him. And now, Seat 1A. He wasn't making a statement. He was simply tired of being questioned after proving himself 10 times over. But still, he rose, slowly, with composure. He stood, not as a concession, but as an act of dignity. He picked up his bag, looked at Rachel, then Craig, and said evenly, "You're asking me to leave this seat because of a glitch you haven't confirmed. You're removing me despite proof that I belong here. You're not protecting protocol. You're protecting prejudice." Craig X8, "Sir, please don't make this political." Donovan's eyes locked onto his. "I didn't." The silence that followed was crushing. Rachel took a small step back. Craig shifted uncomfortably. A few murmurs broke out behind them. "Are you seeing this? Why don't they just check the damn system? Man's got a point." The teenager with the phone was still streaming. Craig motioned toward the exit. "Please, Mr. West." "Was it?" Donovan nodded once. As he passed through the curtain, a black woman in row 3C reached out lightly and touched his arm. She said just one thing, soft but clear. "Thank you for not letting them shrink you." He looked at her, surprised. She wore hospital scrubs beneath her cardigan and had a small tote marked Seattle Children's Medical Center. Her face held empathy, not pity. He gave her a gentle nod and stepped off the plane. At the gate, Craig gestured toward the counter where another agent stood with furrowed brows, typing quickly. A monitor glowed behind them with the passenger manifest. Donovan waited. His hands were in his coat pockets, his face unreadable. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, the gate agent turned the screen toward Craig and whispered something. Craig's shoulders stiffened. He turned, clearing his throat. "Mr. West, looks like there was an internal update that didn't register correctly. You are indeed confirmed for 1A. Donovan blinked slowly. Craig added, quieter, "We're very sorry for the misunderstanding." Donovan didn't respond. Not immediately. He simply turned back toward the plane. But inside his chest, something shifted. Not anger, not triumph, just resolve. Because somewhere inside that aircraft, a story had already begun writing itself. And it wasn't just about a seat. It was about who gets challenged and why. Donovan West stepped back onto Flight 457 with the same quiet grace he had walked on with 30 minutes earlier. But everything had changed. The same faces looked up again. Only now, their gazes lingered a bit longer. Some curious, some guilty, others just pretending not to care. Rachel Kessler, the flight attendant, was at the rear of the first-class cabin, talking in hushed tones to another crew member. She didn't turn around. He returned to seat 1A. The seat was untouched. His bag still lay in the overhead. The boarding pass, his ID, the platinum card gone, returned by the gate agent without a word. He eased into the leather seat and exhaled slowly. This time, the breath carried weight. Not just exhaustion, but something more dangerous, restraint. Donovan had long since mastered the art of appearing unbothered. Growing up in Richmond's South Side, it had been a tool for survival. Later, in Ivy League lecture halls, it became a defense against professors who mistook him for a scholarship athlete. In boardrooms, it was a weapon. Composure unsettled people more than anger ever could. But now on this flight, in this moment, he wasn't performing calm. He was holding it, barely. The girl from earlier, Jasmine Vega, sat just behind him, her phone now lowered but still lit. She whispered something into it, a quiet update to her stream. Her expression had changed too. Less teenage curiosity, more protective disbelief. Row 2A. The sharp-eyed woman with silver hair leaned slightly forward again. "I hope they gave you more than an apology," she said gently. Donovan looked over his shoulder. "They did not." She pressed her lips together. "Figures." He nodded once, then turned back toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The runway shimmered under soft sunlight just beginning to push through the gray. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be pushing back shortly. Estimated arrival time in Seattle is 4 hours, 28 minutes. Weather looks smooth. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." It was routine, but nothing about this felt routine anymore. Donovan leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The low rumble of the engines vibrated under his feet. He let the sound settle in his bones, tried to let it soothe the ache in his chest. But then came the thought, what if I hadn't stood my ground? What if I'd just moved quietly? As they asked, what would they have assumed about me? And what would I have assumed about myself? A small memory surfaced. His father, towering and worn from factory work, once telling 12-year-old Donovan, "You don't fight every battle, son, but the ones you choose you don't lose." He opened his eyes again. The seatbelt sign pinged overhead. Across the aisle, a man in a pressed blazer and AirPods turned his head toward Donovan and muttered, "Wild how defensive some people get over a seat." Donovan looked at him just for a second, then looked away. Not worth it. But his heart beat faster now. Rachel moved down the aisle, offering hot towels. She paused at Donovan's row. Her face was stiff, rehearsed. "Would you like a towel, sir?" she asked. He said nothing at first, just met her eyes. "Yes," he said finally, his voice cool. "Thank you." She handed him one and moved on without a word. In row 3C, Dr. Tameka Reese watched her carefully. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then softened as she looked toward Donovan. Their eyes met. She gave the smallest nod. He returned it. The plane began to taxi. Donovan watched the landscape crawl by. The terminals, the cargo trucks, the jetways. Everything outside was gray and metallic and slow. Everything inside him was hot and fast and turning. He pulled out his phone. A few messages had already arrived. One from his executive assistant. "Arya, are you okay? There's a video trending. You're in it." Another from his COO. "Don't say anything publicly yet. We're assessing." And then a third from his daughter, Elise. She was 15, a poet. Too quiet for most teachers. But not for him. Her text was only 2 words, saw everything. He stared at the screen for a long time. Something inside him cracked. Not enough to spill over, but enough to sting. He began to type, then paused. What do you say to your child after she watches her father be humiliated calmly, quietly, but clearly in public? He erased the draft and simply typed, "I'm okay." Then, after a pause, "We'll talk when I land." The flight climbed into cloud. First class quieted. Donovan leaned back, closed his eyes again. But he couldn't rest. Because now the questions weren't just about the incident. They were about responsibility. What if he hadn't been Donovan West CEO, federal contractor, board advisor? What if it had been his cousin Andre, who worked 2 jobs and never flew first class? Would he have been dragged off, arrested? Would anyone have filmed? Would anyone have believed him? And why did belief always require documentation for people like him? His thoughts spiraled. Should he release a statement? Would it look like self-promotion? Should he remain silent? Would that let the moment fade with no accountability? Was he protecting his brand or protecting a system that punished others more brutally. The seat no longer felt like leather. It felt like weight. And just when he thought he might finally spiral, there was a soft voice. "Excuse me, Mr. West." He turned. It was the same woman from earlier 2A, the one who had spoken up. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a journalist," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I've seen this happen before. I can help if you want to go public." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "What's your name, Eleanor Breck?" He studied her. She didn't look opportunistic. She looked tired, the same tired he felt. "I'll think about it," he said. She nodded. "You don't owe anyone anything. Just know that people saw." Donovan nodded slowly. And in that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Outside the windows, a soft white blur rolled past clouds surrendering to altitude. But inside, the tension hadn't cleared with the weather. Flight 457 was now silent in the way only a pressurized cabin could be contained, watching and listening to everything without saying a word. First class was polished and still, like a showroom no one truly lived in. Except now, it held too many unspoken questions. Donovan West remained seated in 1A. His tray table was down, but untouched. The flight attendant had offered drinks champagne, sparkling water, ginger ale. He had declined all of it. From behind him, he could feel eyes, not hostile, not even overtly judgmental, just curious. And that, sometimes, was worse, because curiosity without compassion turned people into spectators. Donovan took a breath and folded his hands in his lap. He could feel the residue of the earlier moment still clinging to the air like invisible static. Across the aisle, the man with AirPods Donovan now knew his name was Ben Rutherford. Based on the ticket stub visible in his lap, was pretending to watch a movie. But his glances toward Donovan hadn't stopped. Behind Donovan, in row 3, the girl Jasmine Vega was still scrolling. Her live stream had ended about 15 minutes after takeoff, but the comment notifications continued to light up her phone. The thumbnail Donovan sitting calmly while Rachel confronted him was already going viral. She hadn't planned for that. A soft voice interrupted the quiet. "Excuse me?" Donovan turned slightly. It was Dr. Tameka Reese, the woman in 3C. She leaned forward again, her cardigan draped neatly over her lap. "I just wanted to say I saw the whole thing," she said. "I wasn't sure whether to step in. I should have done more." Donovan shook his head gently. "You did enough. You acknowledged it. That's more than most." She paused. "I work in pediatric oncology. A lot of my colleagues, people of color, have stories like that. Flights, hotel, conferences. It never matters how educated we are. We're still expected to prove our right to exist in certain spaces." He didn't respond immediately, but he met her eyes. That was enough. Rachel Kessler reappeared. She walked down the aisle with a metal cart, distributing snacks and drinks. Her steps were sharper now, more practiced. She moved as if retraining herself to act neutral, but neutrality after bias always rang false. When she arrived at Donovan's row, she didn't speak. She simply placed the small packaged almonds and a water bottle on his tray. He looked at them, then looked at her. "Is this what courtesy looks like after accusation?" he asked quietly. Rachel didn't answer. She moved on quickly. From row 2A, Eleanor Breck, the journalist, spoke without looking up from her notebook. That was a bad choice. Rachel. Rachel stopped, turned. I'm just doing my job. Exactly, Eleanor said. You're doing your job now. The question is why you didn't do it 30 minutes ago. Rachel's face tightened. I'm not going to be lectured in front of passengers. Then maybe you should have thought about that before humiliating one, Eleanor replied. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it spread. A ripple passed through the cabin. Not chaos, not yet, but something colder, heavier, like still water starting to crack. Rachel moved faster down the aisle now. Donovan stared at the almonds. He wasn't hungry, but he opened the pack, slowly, methodically. He popped one into his mouth and chewed slowly, more a gesture than a need, a claim, a moment of returning to normalcy, even if the normal had already shifted. In the galley behind first class, Rachel leaned against the wall. Her hands were shaking. Another crew member, a younger woman named Mia, stood near her, uncertain whether to intervene. Rachel muttered under her breath, "This is getting out of hand." Mia frowned. He didn't raise his voice once. "That's not the point," Rachel snapped, then softened. I felt something was off. I reacted. It happens. But the seat was his." Rachel didn't reply. Mia added softly, "It's not the first time people are watching." "Rachel." Rachel looked up sharply. Mia backed away. "I didn't mean just be careful. Meanwhile." Donovan's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a push alert. CEO involved in in-flight incident live video sparks questions on Silverjet Flight 457. The thumbnail was Jasmine's stream. He glanced behind him, saw her shrink slightly into her hoodie. He turned in his seat, addressed her gently. "You okay?" She blinked. "I didn't mean for it to blow up like that. I just wanted people to see." Donovan nodded. "And they did. I can take it down if you want," she offered. He thought for a moment. "No," he said. "Let it stay. This isn't about me anymore." She looked down, her voice softer now. "My uncle. Same thing happened to him. They said his credit card didn't scan right at the hotel. He ended up sleeping in the car. Never forgot it." Donovan felt something tighten in his chest. How many of these stories lived just beneath the surface? How many moments like this did people carry without ever saying a word? A voice came from row 4. "Excuse me, sir," an older man, white-haired and wearing a U.S. Navy veteran's cap, leaned forward. "I just want to say I served with a lot of good men who looked like you. They deserved better than this." Donovan blinked. "Thank you," he said quietly. The man nodded. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but not everyone's blind on this plane." The cabin had changed. It was no longer a first-class cabin. It was a courtroom, a confessional, a place where the silence had been broken, and now no one could pretend they hadn't heard. Rachel returned again, face tight, lips pressed. "We'll be landing in approximately 2 hours," she said to the cabin in general. "Please let us know if there's anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable." No one answered. Donovan leaned back. He looked around the cabin at the people who had watched, spoken, or stayed silent. Then he closed his eyes again, but his mind was already at work. Not with retaliation, with clarity. He wasn't going to wait until landing to act. He had a call to make, and a decision to set in motion. The quiet whir of the engines filled the cabin like white noise, masking the unrest that brewed just beneath its sleek surface. Donovan West sat upright now, no longer retreating into the seat, but leaning slightly forward, as if something inside had clicked into place. He glanced around. The cabin was dim. Most passengers pretended to nap, headphones in, eyes closed, but minds open. Everyone knew what had happened, and no one could unknow it. Donovan unlocked his phone and scrolled past the texts. His finger hovered over one contact. Veronica Ames, CEO, Silverjet Airlines. He tapped call. There was a moment's pause. Then a sharp, composed voice answered. Veronica Ames. Veronica. It's Donovan West. A pause. Longer than expected. Then, Donovan. I heard. I figured. He stared out the window as clouds passed in lazy, sunlit layers. I wasn't going to call yet, he said quietly. But I'm sitting in first class on your aircraft, and I'm about to initiate a crisis neither of us can walk back from. Veronica exhaled, audible even through the line. I'm sorry. Donovan. I didn't know. I'm not calling for an apology, he interrupted, though his tone remained measured. I'm calling because you need to decide what kind of company you want Silverjet to be. You and I have worked too closely for too long for this to be swept under a PR statement. I agree, she said, calmer now. Do you want to speak publicly? No, boy, he replied. I want action, and I want it now. Another pause. Then Veronica's voice softened. Tell me what you need. He leaned back slightly, glancing around. Rachel Kessler stood mid-cabin, pouring water for another passenger. She avoided his gaze. I want her off this flight the moment we land, he said, without argument, without delay. Veronica was quiet. And I want your executive team to meet me at the gate. Not in a boardroom. At the gate. Publicly. I want them to walk me off this plane, and I want every passenger to see it. That's bold, Veronica said carefully. So was dragging me off a plane. Donovan replied. Silence. Then a soft, You'll have it. He nodded slowly. I appreciate it. One more thing, she added. May I send a message to the crew? Quietly mid-flight. Do it fast, Donovan said, because if the cabin doesn't see real accountability soon, they'll decide the narrative for you. He ended the call. In the galley, Rachel's crew phone buzzed. She checked it, then blinked twice, jaw tightening. She stepped away from the other attendants and reread the message. Her face paled. Across the cabin, Dr. Temeka Reese noticed. She leaned slightly toward Eleanor Breck. Something shifted. She murmured, Eleanor, ever observant, simply nodded. Donovan opened his notes app and began typing not a statement, not yet, but thoughts, pieces, something personal. He typed slowly. Dignity isn't given when asked. It's preserved when demanded. Not for ego, for legacy, for everyone who watches silently, waiting to see if they're next. He paused. Then my daughter watched today. I need to show her the silence isn't strength, that we don't earn our place, we claim it. He stopped writing. He breathed in deeply, let it settle inside him. Jasmine Vega tapped his shoulder gently from behind. She looked uncertain. I know I said I'd keep it up, but now the video has 2 million views. It's on 3 news sites. People are tagging your company. He nodded. Calm. Let them. I just didn't think it would. She hesitated. I'm not trying to get famous. Donovan smiled faintly. You won't be, he said. The world isn't watching you. They're watching what this plane chooses to do. Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, You're not like most adults. I'm tired of being silent like them, he replied. Mia. The younger flight attendant approached quietly. Her hands trembled slightly. Mr. West. He turned. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how all this was handled. He nodded once. "Thank you. I can't speak for her," she added, gesturing subtly toward Rachel. "But I see you, and I'm sorry." Her voice cracked at the last word. Donovan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple white card. "Westbridge Technologies, executive contact. No title, just his name and direct line." He handed it to her. "If Silverjet starts something new after today," he said gently, "I hope you're part of it." Mia blinked, surprised, then pocketed the card. "Thank you," she said, almost in a whisper. Rachel passed her on the way to the front, shooting a sharp glance. Mia walked away. The announcement tone chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant, Rachel. We will be beginning our descent into Seattle in approximately 40 minutes. Please begin returning your seats to the upright position and prepare for landing." There was something shaky in her voice, something uncertain. It didn't go unnoticed. Row by row, passengers straightened. Some watched silently. Some whispered. In the back of first class, Eleanor Breck pulled out her phone. "Seattle Times will be waiting at the gate," she texted. "Dr." Reese leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, watching. Ben Rutherford glanced at Donovan one more time. But this time, it wasn't smug. It was cautious. The sky outside had darkened again. Evening was falling. Donovan reached into his bag and pulled out a small leather notebook, his daughter's gift last Christmas. He wrote one final line before the plane began to descend. "Sometimes the sky looks quiet, but storms gather in silence." And this storm had a name now. The descent began so gently that most passengers didn't feel it at first. Only the slight tilt of their soda cans on tray tables hinted that gravity had resumed its quiet pull. Outside, the sun was just beginning to lower itself into the horizon. The Seattle skyline was visible now through breaks in the clouds, backlit in a soft burnished gold. A peaceful view completely at odds with what was happening inside the cabin. Donovan West straightened his seat with a calmness that belied the thrum of thought behind his eyes. No one had spoken to him again, not Rachel, not the captain, not any member of the senior flight staff, and that silence, that calculated avoidance, had spoken louder than any apology ever could. He knew corporate damage control when he saw it, and he also knew the moment just before a system fractured. Behind him, Jasmine Vega leaned forward and whispered through the crack between the seats. "They're waiting at the gate. The media. Like cameras. A lot." Donovan nodded once, unsurprised. "Good," he said quietly. His phone buzzed again. A text from his executive assistant. "Olivia Marcus, sir. Video hit 3.9 million. Board meeting called for 9A. Mem. EST. Press demand statement. Waiting for your direction." Donovan typed back with one hand. "No press statement yet. Let the arrival speak for itself." He closed the phone and looked around slowly. The passengers were still watching, but something had shifted. The watching had turned into knowing. Everyone on board now understood that they were witnesses to something bigger than a travel delay. This was no longer about an uncomfortable misunderstanding. It was about power, about dignity, about who gets to sit, and who is told they don't belong, even when they do. Across the aisle, Eleanor Breck had stopped writing. She was now just observing, studying faces, body language, the micro-expressions of guilt and discomfort. She wasn't just reporting anymore. She was documenting. Behind her, Dr. Tameka Reese closed her medical journal and clasped her hands over her lap, eyes forward. Rachel Kessler stood stiff near the front of the cabin, just behind the drawn curtain. Her posture had turned rigid, not with discipline, but with dread. She had checked her phone. She had read the updated memo from Silverjet's executive office. She knew what was waiting in the jetway. Her mouth was dry. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, her scarf like a noose around her throat. Mia, on the other hand, stood quietly behind the beverage cart, glancing occasionally toward Donovan, then down again. Her eyes were brimming with something else, not fear, not pity, but resolve. As the landing gear deployed, there was a shift in cabin pressure, followed by the dull hydraulic hum that signaled final descent. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. We will be arriving at Gate C-18 shortly. For those of you making connections, please check the monitors inside the terminal. We thank you for flying with Silverjet." Even the pilot sounded careful now. The wheels touched down with a soft double bump, and the cabin gave a collective breath. No applause, no chatter, just silence. As the plane taxied to the gate, Donovan opened the notebook again. He didn't write anything. He just held it in his lap, one hand resting on the cover. His pulse had slowed, not because the conflict was over, but because his path forward was now crystal clear. He was no longer reacting. He was preparing. The aircraft came to a gentle stop. The seatbelt chime rang, and then came the real test. Would Rachel do it? Would she face him? Would she own what she'd done, or would she fold under the weight of institutional silence? She stepped forward, and to everyone's surprise, picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. For safety reasons, please remain seated until we arrive at the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of Silverjet Airlines and the entire crew, we thank you." For her voice caught for just half a second, a visible tremor, "for flying with us today." Then she hung up the receiver and stood still. Mia came forward with quiet hands, assisting with coat retrieval. Her movements were precise, careful, respectful. When the seatbelt sign clicked off, a few passengers stood immediately, but Donovan didn't. He waited. He had no intention of rushing to get off the plane, because for once, the world could wait for him. As the jet bridge connected, the front door opened with a mechanical hiss. What greeted them was not normal. Outside, a row of suited individuals stood in full view, 4 members of Silverjet's executive leadership team, including Veronica Ames herself, dressed in a navy trench coat and heels, standing tall. Behind them, a flurry of local press with cameras held ready. Airport security kept a soft barrier, not to interfere, just to observe. Donovan saw them before stepping out, but made no motion to rise. Instead, he waited for Rachel to turn around. And when she finally did her face pale, her fingers tightening around her scarf, he looked her in the eye. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk. He simply said, "I hope today taught you that uniforms don't excuse assumptions." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never formed. Instead, she stepped aside, and Donovan stood. He reached for his coat, took his notebook in hand, and began walking toward the front of the aircraft. The passengers parted like water, and as he stepped through the doorway, into the clear light of Gate C-18, the clicking of cameras began. Veronica stepped forward, extending her hand. He took it. "Donovan," she said, with quiet weight, "we'll make this right." He gave the faintest nod, but said nothing, because some moments required silence to echo. And this one would echo for a long, long time. The air in Gate C-18 was different. It didn't hum with the usual post-landing busyness of suitcases rolling and tired passengers rushing for connections. Instead, it hung thick with stillness, the kind that comes when something important is about to unfold. Donovan stepped through the jet bridge slowly, his coat over one arm, the leather-bound notebook in his hand. The eyes of reporters locked onto him instantly. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, but he didn't flinch. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He wasn't here to perform. Veronica Ames stepped forward from the line of executives, heels clicking on the polished tile. Her face was composed, but not cold. There was a tremor of something deeper, humility, maybe, or regret. "Donovan," she said, extending her hand again, not as a greeting this time, but as a gesture of acknowledgement. He took it briefly. "You asked for accountability. You have it," she said quietly, then turned slightly to her left. Rachel Kessler emerged from the jet bridge behind him. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the authority she had once wielded so confidently. Her posture was tight, her face blank. Veronica turned toward her and addressed the crowd with careful clarity, effective immediately. "Rachel Kessler has been relieved of duty pending full investigation and formal termination proceedings. Dossier named. Her actions today do not reflect the values of Silverjet Airlines, nor the dignity owed to any of our passengers." A ripple of murmurs spread across the waiting area. Rachel didn't speak. She just nodded faintly and lowered her eyes. A security escort, discreet and professional, gestured toward the exit. She walked quietly beside them, never once looking back. Inside the terminal, passengers from Flight 457 began emerging. Some paused to watch, some filmed with their phones. A few, including Jasmine Vega, stood close enough to be pulled into the historic moment. Jasmine stared, wide-eyed, as Donovan stood at the center of it all. She clutched her phone, still live-streaming. "Dr." Tameka Reese came to Donovan's side, standing slightly behind him in solidarity, not needing to speak, just being present. "Donovan," Veronica said again, voice measured but strained. "This can't end at the gate." "It won't," he replied. "We have attorneys on standby, HR, media containment. We're ready for—" "I'm not here for spin," he said firmly. "I'm here for truth. And I won't settle for a controlled cleanup." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Then what do you want?" He looked around. "I want every passenger who watched this unfold to know that what happened on that plane mattered. That we're not going to bury this under policy language. That we're not going to treat it like a bad Apple story." He turned to the reporters, now inching forward. "I want the world to know that institutions don't change because they're exposed. They change when the people inside them decide that silence costs more than accountability." Then he looked back at Veronica. "Tell your board that. And tell your employees they're not invisible." Veronica didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened. "We've already grounded 3 more flight leads pending review. We've opened a whistleblower channel tied directly to my office, and the internal diversity metrics will now report to the public quarterly." He gave a small nod. Not approval, just acknowledgement, and Rachel permanent dismissal. No severance, no protection. That was enough. For now. Behind them. Eleanor Breck scribbled in her notepad with practiced urgency. This wasn't just a travel story anymore. It was a case study in modern corporate reckoning. Donovan turned toward the cameras. "I wasn't going to speak today," he began slowly. "But when you're dragged to the edge of humiliation in front of strangers, silence becomes its own form of surrender." He paused. "I was told directly and with no shame that I didn't belong in the seat I paid for. Not because of policy, not because of protocol, but because of assumption." His voice remained low, clear, calm. Assumption based on skin, on presence, on power they didn't think I had. A murmur went through the journalists. I've spent my life in rooms where I had to prove I belonged. Even when I owned the room. On that plane. I wasn't just told I didn't belong. I was handled, redirected, dismissed, like many before me, like too many still will be. He looked directly at the cameras now. This isn't just about me. It's about what happens when good people watch bad moments and stay seated. About what happens when dignity is treated like a privilege, not a right. He closed the notebook. I'm not filing a lawsuit. Not today. I'm not calling for boycotts. Not yet. But I will call for memory, for attention, for clarity, because the sky belongs to all of us. He stepped back. No applause followed, just silence. A heavy, thoughtful silence. Then someone began clapping. Mia, from the flight crew, standing near the back of the gate. Her hands shook a little, but she clapped anyway. Then Jasmine. Then a ripple of passengers from Flight 457. It wasn't theatrical. It was slow. Hesitant at first, then firm. Donovan didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just stood tall, the notebook still in his hand. Veronica leaned in quietly. We've issued an emergency summit with FAA observers. I want you there. I will be, he said. And then, with one final glance back toward the now empty jet bridge, Donovan walked toward the terminal exit. The press followed him at a distance. The passengers carried their stories home, and the airline, once confident in silence, now found itself forced to speak. The next 48 hours swept through the country like a summer thunderstorm, sudden, loud, electric. The video, now clipped and subtitled in multiple languages, reached 19.2 million views across social platforms. Major networks cut segments of Donovan's gate speech into primetime news. Hashtags erupted. Hose, Donovan West. Seat for dignity. Black seat matters. And perhaps the most telling. We see you now. But beneath the viral spectacle, something quieter unfolded. A reckoning. At Silverjet Airlines headquarters in Chicago, the boardroom was uncharacteristically full for a Sunday morning. No suits, no ties. Just concerned, weary faces under harsh fluorescent lighting. At the center sat Veronica Ames, looking more tired than any of them had ever seen her. She cleared her throat. I won't begin this with a defense, she said, because there isn't one. There were nods, slow and solemn. What happened on Flight 457 is not isolated. We've combed the reports. There are patterns subtle, embedded, but consistent. Discretion used as bias, policy interpreted as prejudice, and leadership at every level, not listening. A murmur passed through the room. One board member raised a hand. How do we contain this? Veronica looked him dead in the eyes. We don't. We confront it, across the city, in a much smaller office with fewer windows. Donovan West sat with Olivia Marcus and his internal counsel. The energy was different, less corporate, more surgical. On the desk before them was a list. Each item was numbered, timed, and color-coded. Olivia had spent the night drafting it while fielding nonstop media calls. Okay, she said, breathing in. We have 3 primary offers on the table. Consulting advisory, seat on Silverjet's diversity task force, or creation of an independent oversight board named after you. Donovan shook his head. I don't want my name stamped onto a committee just to make investors feel better. You want something structural, Olivia said. He nodded. Then we go with the protocol. She pulled a separate folder and opened it slowly. Inside was a proposal Donovan had written nearly 2 years earlier, rejected, then shelved. A framework for aviation dignity reform. Its name, the West Protocol, widening equity standards in transit. A flight industry accountability system rooted in real-time feedback, crew transparency, and third-party oversight. It had been too progressive at the time, too ambitious. Now, it was urgent. Across the city, in a modest apartment, Jasmine Vega sat cross-legged on her bed, phone buzzing nonstop. Her video had gone viral overnight. Her face was now plastered across her own timeline in screen captures and animated GIFs. But the likes and shares didn't comfort her, because along with the attention came something darker. Comments, DMs, hate. She staged it, probably looking for a scholarship, more woke nonsense. Sit down. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Then she stopped. One message stood out. It was from Donovan West. Your voice mattered. You helped the world see. Thank you. Simple, steady, enough to pull the air back into her lungs. Meanwhile, in a hotel suite overlooking Lake Michigan, Rachel Kessler sat alone. Her career, 14 years of spotless service, was over. Her employee account had been deactivated. Her name was trending for the wrong reasons. But what haunted her most wasn't the cameras or the headlines. It was the look in Donovan's eyes when he said, "I hope today taught you that uniforms don't excuse assumptions." She repeated the line aloud, softly, as if trying to understand the wound she had helped inflict. On another floor of the same hotel, Eleanor Breck drafted her editorial. She was choosing her words carefully, not because she feared backlash, but because she wanted them to last. She didn't want to write another piece about airline discrimination. She wanted to write about what silence does to people, about how institutions learn to justify cruelty with a smile and a script, about how dignity feels when it's taken and what it looks like when someone refuses to give it up. By Monday morning, the country was different. Silverjet's stock dipped by 8%. Their customer service lines were flooded. Internal crew chats were leaking online, showing years of flagged complaints gone unanswered. Donovan West, despite countless interview requests, stayed silent. He wasn't chasing the microphone. He was preparing the blueprint. At home that evening, he sat on his balcony with a cup of black tea. The city lights twinkled below him, but his eyes were unfocused. Olivia stepped out, holding a tablet. "Media's going hard. But it's shifting," she said. "People aren't just talking about what happened to you. They're talking about what happens to all of us. Quietly. Every day." He nodded slowly. "I didn't want to become a symbol," he said. She tilted her head. "You didn't become one. They made you one. But what you do next, that's your choice." Donovan sat back. He was tired, more tired than he'd admit, but the kind of tired that came not from defeat, but from clarity. "I don't want this to be about vengeance," he said. "I want it to be about vision." And with that, he picked up the notebook, the same one he had carried on Flight 457, and began writing again. Not as a record, but as a plan. Because real change doesn't begin in the spotlight. It begins when the camera turns off, and the work begins. The hearing room at the Federal Aviation Oversight Commission wasn't built for spectacle. Its walls were unadorned, the lighting sterile, the seating arranged with bureaucratic efficiency. And yet on this Wednesday morning, it felt more like a courtroom stage than a conference chamber. Press weren't allowed inside, only FAA representatives, airline executives, select passengers, and those summoned to speak. The rest of the nation watched through live summaries, leaks, and legal commentary panels waiting outside. Donovan West sat at the end of a long oak table, wearing a slate-gray suit and no tie. His expression was unreadable, not cold, but composed in that way that made people lean in. Olivia Marcus sat beside him, flanked by 2 compliance attorneys. He wasn't here for vengeance, he was here for truth. Across the room sat Veronica Ames, flanked by 2 Silverjet lawyers and internal counsel. Behind them, visible but separate, sat Rachel Kessler. No uniform, civilian clothing. She looked pale under the fluorescent lights, her hair pulled back too tight as if to hide the shakiness in her features. The lead FAA Commissioner, Nora Lattimore, adjusted her glasses and began. This hearing is not a legal proceeding, but an inquiry into operational equity, public safety, and passenger dignity aboard commercial aircraft. Today we review the incident on Flight 457 and the systemic issues it may represent. She turned to Donovan first. Mr. West, you may proceed with your statement. He stood, unfolded a page from his notebook. Didn't read it, just held it. Thank you. Commissioner Lattimore, I will speak plainly. I boarded Flight 457 with a confirmed first-class seat. I was treated as if I had stolen it. I was redirected without justification, without apology, and with the kind of quiet force that isn't loud, but lacerates. He looked directly at the commissioner. And I wasn't alone, because I've since heard from dozens of others who were moved, delayed, searched, dismissed, or denied not because of policy, but because of perception. He placed the page back on the table, sat down. A murmur passed through the room. Commissioner Lattimore gave a single nod, then gestured toward the witness coordinator. They called the next name, Dr. Tameka Reese. Tameka stepped forward with quiet resolve. Her blouse was soft blue, and her tone was measured but firm. I was seated in row 2A when I watched Mr. West be questioned repeatedly about his boarding group and ticket. I offered to show my own as comparison. I was dismissed. When I asked why he was being moved, I was told it was for operational balance. She paused. Strange, because the man they replaced him with was larger and louder. That landed hard. Next came Mia, the young flight attendant who had clapped at the gate. Her voice shook at first, but she steadied herself with every sentence. I was on galley duty when I overheard Rachel Kessler say, "He doesn't look like a Westbridge exec to me." I didn't speak up then. I didn't want to lose my job. I regret that now. Deeply. Donovan didn't react. But Olivia's jaw tightened just slightly. Then, the name that made the room shift, Rachel Kessler. She hesitated before standing. Her steps were slow. The chair creaked as she sat. No attorney accompanied her, no allies. She faced the microphone alone. I've served 14 years in flight operations, she began, and I've trained over 80 junior attendants. I've been commended for punctuality, safety, and poise. She looked directly at Donovan. But I have not been commended for courage. And that's the truth I need to say today. She swallowed hard. What I did on that flight was wrong. I see it now. I categorized Mr. West before he opened his mouth. I questioned his presence because it didn't align with my unspoken assumptions. Not policy, not protocol, assumptions. A hush fell over the room. I want to apologize, not just to him, but to every person I've redirected or doubted over the years without realizing the harm I caused. She breathed out, and if that cost me my career, I accept it. Commissioner Lattimore sat in silence for a beat longer than expected. Then she turned the page. Next witness, Jameson Price. A man in his mid-50s stepped forward. Glasses, soft southern accent. I'm a retired executive from Oakland, he said. I flew Silverjet first class every month for 8 years. I kept a journal after my son told me, Dad, maybe you're not imagining things. So I logged it. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Over 23 flights. I was questioned about my ID 9 times. My carry-on was checked 5. My boarding privileges challenged 4. I have never once seen the same happen to a white passenger seated next to me. His voice trembled only once. I thought I was paranoid. Turns out I was just black and paying attention. Commissioner Lattimore paused again. This concludes witness statements for today. The room exhaled, but Donovan remained still. After a brief recess, the commissioners moved into questions. Veronica answered carefully, relying on policy notes, internal memos, and PR training. But there was no dodging this storm, because now it had faces, stories, names. When the hearing adjourned, Rachel lingered in the hallway outside. Donovan passed her quietly. She turned toward him, just slightly. I didn't see you, she said softly. I thought I did, but I didn't. He nodded. Now you do. He didn't wait for a response. Outside the building, a quiet crowd had gathered. Not protesters, not reporters, just people. Ordinary people who had seen the video, who had flown that airline, who had swallowed their discomfort 1,000 times and said nothing. One woman stepped forward as Donovan exited. I'm not famous, she said, but I fly Silverjet to see my grandkids. Thank you for not letting them forget we matter. He looked at her. You've always mattered, he said. They just have to learn how to act like it. That night, the FAO published a brief statement. The hearing has revealed significant cause for further inquiry and industry-wide protocol evaluation. And the headline on Eleanor Breck's piece that evening read, Not policy, perception. What we learned in one day of testimony. 3 days after the FAA hearing, the world held its breath. Silverjet Airlines had issued another statement, this one crafted by 6 PR consultants and cleared through 3 legal teams. It apologized again, promised retraining, pledged to listen more. But the public didn't want another statement. They wanted action. And at 9 a.m. Eastern, they got it. The live stream began without introduction. A white screen, then a simple black serif font faded in. Presented by Donovan West, CEO of Westbridge Technologies. No music, no drone shots, just Donovan, sitting alone at a round table in what appeared to be a home office. Bookshelves behind him, a mug of black tea beside a leather-bound notebook. Calm, focused. Good morning, he began. This isn't a press conference. It's not about damage control. I'm not here to rehash what happened to me. We've all seen the footage. He leaned forward, folding his hands. I'm here to talk about what happens next. He paused, letting silence settle like a breath before truth. When I was removed from my seat on Flight 457, I didn't just lose a chair. I lost the presumption of legitimacy, of respect, of being seen without suspicion. A photo appeared beside him, a grainy screenshot of him standing at the gate, holding his boarding pass. But I'm not the only one. And that's the point. He tapped the notebook. Years ago, my team at Westbridge developed an aviation oversight model that measured how dignity shows up in airline operations. It wasn't popular. It challenged comfort zones. But after recent events, I'm making it public. He opened the notebook and turned it around to face the camera. The West Protocol Widening Equity Standards in Transit. Donovan explained it simply, clearly. It was a 6-tier system built on real-time data, transparent crew evaluations, and community oversight. It included anonymous passenger equity feedback, Linked to flights and crew, but anonymized for safety. Bias detection training with live performance reviews, not annual checkboxes. Flight equity ratings, posted publicly like restaurant grades. Boarding gate audits, monitored by third-party civil rights observers. Mini equity complaint hotlines, staffed independently of airline HR. Mandatory quarterly reporting to the FAA on passenger treatment metrics. And most controversial of all, crew certification suspension for consistent bias behavior, regardless of tenure or status. The West Protocol, Donovan said, isn't about punishing crew. It's about protecting passengers, about lifting the dignity of the flying public, especially those who are often unseen, unheard, or quietly displaced. Social media lit up. Comments flooded in before he even finished. This is what real leadership looks like. Protect this man at all costs. Let's see what Silverjet does now. Donovan continued, his voice unwavering. I'm also proposing that implementation of this protocol become an FAA benchmark across all U.S. airlines. And I've already secured initial funding to offer technical assistance and training for those willing to pilot the program. Then he dropped the final note. I've also spoken with executives at 3 major airline competitors who are already reviewing adoption. The tide is shifting. That was the moment. The ripple turned into a wave. Veronica Ames watched the broadcast from her office with her legal advisor. She didn't speak for the first 5 minutes, just watched. And when Donovan unveiled the West Protocol in full, she closed her eyes and exhaled. We should have partnered with him, she said softly. Her advisor nodded. There's still a path forward, but it's going to cost. She looked up. Not just money. No, he said. Reputation, power, habits, across the country. The broadcast played in airports, on tablets, in staff lounges. Flight crews watched it between gates. Airline boards scrambled for emergency meetings. And in living rooms everywhere, passengers remembered how they were stared at, delayed, moved, doubted, ignored. And for the first time, someone had written it down, not just the story, but the solution. Donovan closed the broadcast with no applause, no grand finale, just these words. Dignity is not a luxury. It's not a seat class. It's the starting point. He nodded, and the screen faded to black. By nightfall, the video had 27 million views. 4 major airlines released simultaneous statements. Jet Western, we are reviewing the West Protocol with our equity teams. Eagle Stream Air, we invite Mr. West to speak with our board. Atlas Wings, we acknowledge systemic challenges and support real oversight. Sky Summit Airlines, effective immediately. We will pilot several West Protocol systems. Silverjet, they went silent, at least publicly. Behind closed doors, Veronica Ames called an emergency session of her executive team. The numbers in bookings were down 19%. Social media engagement was 72% negative. Longtime loyal customers were switching carriers. Veronica stood before her team. We have 2 choices, she said. We fight the tide and drown, or we admit the system failed, including us, and we let something better rise. Silence. Then a voice from the back. Rachel Kessler offered to speak with new hire groups, train them on what she got wrong. Everyone turned. Veronica's eyes softened. Good. Then she turned to her assistant. Get Donovan West on the phone. Tell him we want to talk this time. Not about image, about integration. Meanwhile, Donovan sat at home, reading messages pouring in from across the world. One was from a pilot in Atlanta. I've worked 20 years in this industry. We needed this. Thank you. Another from a mother in Boston. My son's name is Jamal. I've watched him be treated like a threat since he was 12. You gave me hope today. He scrolled to one from Rachel. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to help others do better. Donovan closed his eyes. It was working, not because of him, but because people were finally ready to see. He turned to Olivia. We need to build a training model, not just policy, culture shift. She was already drafting it. Outside, a car passed. A child laughed in the street, and for the first time in a long time, Donovan West allowed himself a quiet smile. Flight 2089 from Newark to San Diego wasn't just another cross-country trip. It was the first official implementation of the West Protocol aboard a commercial airline. Silverjet had reluctantly agreed to host the pilot run, overseen directly by a third-party equity auditing team and embedded observers from the FOA. Every crew member on board had received updated equity training. Every passenger-facing protocol was adjusted. Gate agents were briefed. Announcements were revised. Even uniforms had been slightly modified to include a new patch bearing the words, "We see you." Donovan West did not board the flight. He didn't need to. Instead, he watched the pre-flight footage remotely with Olivia Marcus and a small circle of compliance analysts. They were monitoring crew cam footage and anonymous equity feedback responses in a real-time part of the new transparency model. The flight boarded smoothly at first. Smiles, greetings, even a few passengers commenting on the new system. It's about time, one woman said while settling into her aisle seat. Feels like someone's finally listening. In row 3B, a man named Marcus Dean adjusted his briefcase and put on noise-canceling headphones. An executive at a tech startup. Marcus was used to being invisible in first class, the only black man in a sea of navy blazers. But today, he noticed something different. He had been greeted by name, offered assistance without being watched suspiciously. His ID had not been rechecked. It shouldn't have felt special. But it did. Behind him, seated in row 4A. A retired Army medic named Carla Ortiz filled out her passenger feedback form on the new digital tablet embedded in the seatback. Question 4. Do you feel respected and seen during this boarding process? She tapped, yes, but then came the test. 20 minutes before departure. A gate supervisor entered the aircraft and motioned to a flight attendant. He whispered something about a seat discrepancy in 3B, the same seat Marcus Dean occupied. The tension crept in quietly, like a shadow slipping through the aisle. The attendant approached Marcus, gently but hesitantly. Sir, I'm so sorry. There's been a change in the manifest. May I see your boarding pass again? Marcus lowered his headphones. He knew this moment. He'd lived it before. My boarding pass, he asked calmly. Why, there's been a system mismatch, the attendant replied. We just need to verify. He handed it over without protest, but his heart sank. The attendant glanced down, then up again. You're cleared, Mr. Dean. Apologies. The manifest was outdated. It could have ended there. But then a man from row 5B stood up. Tall, Caucasian, expensive watch. He stepped forward, holding his phone like a badge. That's my seat, he said. I was upgraded this morning. The crew froze. The gate supervisor stepped in. Sir, may I see your ticket? The man looked irritated. Why, it was approved by customer service. The flight attendant returned the boarding pass to Marcus. Mr. Dean is in the correct seat, she said, firmly now. The upgrade was rescinded during the protocol audit. The man's jaw tensed. So I get downgraded because of this new, what do you call it? Justice seating. From the flight deck. A voice crackled through the intercom. Captain Torres here. We'll be experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated as we finalize departure." Marcus Dean remained quiet. He turned slightly and met the man's gaze. "I didn't take your seat," he said. "You assumed it was yours to take." That landed harder than anything else. Back in the monitoring room, Olivia turned to Donovan. "We almost lost the thread, but we didn't," he replied, "because the crew held the line." At the end of the flight, all 152 passengers were invited to complete anonymous feedback forms, now a required West protocol component. Over 90% marked improved experience ratings. The man who caused the disruption, later identified as Alan Bristow, filed a complaint with the airline. But his own behavior was logged in multiple passenger reports, not for being denied a seat, but for his conduct. And more importantly, Marcus Dean's form was reviewed in full by the oversight team. He had written just 5 words in the comment box. "This time, I stayed seated." That quote spread like wildfire across news headlines, reform pages, and even union message boards. Donovan read it twice. "This time, I stayed seated." He let those words settle, because they were everything, not dramatic, not defiant, just rooted, present. For years, passengers like Marcus had been quietly removed, redirected, erased, made to doubt their own right to exist in a space they paid to enter. But now, they were being asked to stay, to belong, and it was working. 3 days later, the FAA released preliminary findings from the West Protocol test. 84% of passengers reported increased feelings of dignity and inclusion. 92% of crew members reported greater clarity in equity procedures. 6 observed microaggressions were de-escalated using protocol scripts. 0 passengers were forcibly moved during reboarding or reseating. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Silverjet, sensing momentum, moved to adopt the West Protocol on 3 more routes. Atlas Wings signed a deal to integrate the system into 12 flights over the next quarter. JetWestern's CEO publicly announced a full-year commitment to evaluate full adoption. And in boardrooms across the nation, executives realized something undeniable. Equity wasn't just a value. It was an operational imperative. At home, Donovan prepared for his next phase, expanding the protocol into rail and ground transportation. His work wasn't done, but the path forward was clearer than ever. He received an email late that night from Marcus Dean. "I've flown 46 times this year. That was the first time I wasn't asked to move, or prove, or explain." Below it was a photo. Marcus smiling, seated in row 3B, in his seat, where he belonged. It was just past sunrise in Washington, D.C., when Donovan West stepped onto the stage of the National Aviation Ethics Forum. The room was packed: executives, civil rights advocates, airline union reps, FAA officials, journalists, and travelers from across the country. But there were no applause lines, no corporate banners, just a simple backdrop bearing 6 bold words in soft blue: "The sky belongs to everyone." He stood silently for a moment, scanning the room, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he spoke. "Thank you all for coming. I didn't think I'd be here not like this. I was supposed to be in Seattle when this all began. Just another business trip. But the world had other plans." A few quiet nods rippled through the audience. When I was removed from my seat on Flight 457, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply stepped aside, because part of me believed for just a second that maybe I didn't belong there. That maybe, even with a valid boarding pass, a suit, and a track record, I had to prove something more. He paused. His voice never cracked, but there was a long breath before he continued. "I haven't stopped thinking about that moment, about how many others have experienced it and said nothing. carried it home like luggage, folded it into silence. The room was still, but today, I want to close that loop. Not just with policy, but with people. He turned toward the large projection screen. A video began to play clips from anonymous passenger testimonials collected during the West Protocol pilot phase. An elderly Asian woman saying, "For the first time, I wasn't stared at for speaking my language." A young Latina mother. "The crew helped with my stroller. Didn't look annoyed, just kind." A Sikh man in a navy turban. "They didn't ask me to remove anything. They smiled. That was all." A child's voice. "The pilot waved at me, like I mattered." As the final clip faded, Donovan spoke again. "This isn't about me anymore. It never really was. It's about what happens when dignity becomes standard, not a luxury. When kindness is built into the script, not reserved for passengers in ties or heels." He clicked a small remote. Behind him appeared the image of a plane in soft charcoal gray, with a new logo beneath the window, West Certified Flight 001. The audience stirred. "As of today," Donovan announced, "Silverjet Airlines has officially implemented the West Protocol across all domestic routes. Jet Western and Atlas Wings will follow suit within the year, and thanks to a new public-private partnership, all U.S. airlines will receive access to West audit tools, equity training, and passenger feedback systems free of charge." A spontaneous round of applause broke out. Not staged, not prompted, just real. But I want to end this story where it began. He stepped aside as a new video began. Footage from the gate at Dallas-Fort Worth. Donovan standing still, holding his boarding pass. Then Olivia Marcus appearing beside him. Then Rachel Kessler, the flight attendant, walking away. The video slowed at that exact moment. A voiceover from Donovan played. "This is what it looked like the moment dignity was denied. But the real story isn't what was taken. It's what we built from it." The screen faded to white. Then a single message appeared. "Stay in your seat. Stay in your truth." Afterward, Donovan remained behind. People approached, shook his hand, shared their stories. A young man in a wheelchair rolled forward. "I'm a flight attendant," he said. "I almost quit after being mocked by my own team. Your work gave me a reason to stay." An older black woman with silver locks. "I worked the gates for 35 years. I watched good men get turned away with a smile. I wish we had you back then, but I'm so glad we have you now." Even Veronica Ames approached, her tone humble. "You didn't just change Silverjet," she said. "You changed what we thought was unchangeable." Donovan smiled. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who refused to stay silent. Later that evening, as he sat beside Olivia at the Westbridge HQ lounge, she handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A proposal from the Department of Transportation. They want to embed West metrics into FAA annual audits." He raised an eyebrow. "Looks like they're ready for a new sky," she said. Donovan leaned back, watching the dust settle outside the glass windows. "You know," he murmured, "for years I believed I had to stay invisible to survive in spaces that weren't made for me. That power meant blending in. But now—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The world was watching now. And more importantly, the world was listening. A week later, as the first nationally broadcast ad for the West Protocol aired, it featured no celebrities, no flashy visuals, just footage of ordinary passengers boarding a plane, a grandfather with a cane, a teenager with a hijab, a mother and child, a man in a yarmulke, a young black father holding a teddy bear, and an older trans woman in a floral scarf. The closing voiceover was Donovan's "Whatever seat you're in, whatever your story. The sky belongs to you too. fade to black. The movement had a name, a face, a mission, and above all else, it had momentum. Not just policy change, but hearts changing, hands extending, crew members asking different questions, gate agents pausing before making assumptions, flight captains checking in, not checking out. The West Protocol had begun as a response to pain, but it became a blueprint for progress, because in the end, the sky was never the limit. It was the promise. They told him to leave his seat, but what they never expected was that he would turn that moment into a movement, from quiet humiliation to national policy, from invisible glances to global headlines. Donovan West didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard, because this was never just about one flight. It was about the silent stories, the countless passengers treated like problems before they even sat down. It was about being watched, doubted, displaced for no reason other than race. This is about dignity, about justice, about creating a sky where every passenger is seen, not judged. And it's also a call to action, to crew members, to gate agents, to CEOs, to us, to question what we've accepted as normal, and to imagine something better, to the ones who've ever been told to move, to the ones who stayed quiet, to the ones who walked off the plane with their heads down. You're not invisible, and your story matters. Let this be a reminder. The sky belongs to everyone. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or feel, or reflect, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. More stories are coming. Real stories. The kind that make you feel. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay in your seat, stay in your truth.